Okay, one. You see the connecting, and we'll say good to go in a second, and we're good to go. And we started the session. Hey guys, how are you doing? Mike Stillberg here again and again and again. We still have another three sessions after this one. We're gonna have John Hawthorne, which I think you probably know, the founder of Mass Challenge.
Awesome.
So he's the next speaker, and then I forgot, we're gonna have Amir Shvat. You heard about Amir Shvat from the Valley?
No.
He was the head of ecosystem at Google. He was the guy in charge of the ecosystem of Google Play. He founded the Google Experts in Israel. He founded IBM, the community program. He was a community leader in Twitch. Was a senior executive there, and now he's a CPO of Reshuffle, which is a company. No worries.
Yeah. So I know him. Very famous guy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, Neil is a community kick-ass expert, and also after that, Ilana Golan, entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and she invests a lot in different communities. Really cool to hear about the communities she built and invested in. And afterwards, I think she's the last keynote, and that will finish the day for today. And we have another 2 full days with 3 sessions every time together in the same space. How are you doing today, Derek? Today we have Derek Andersen, co-founder and CEO of Bevy, founder of Startup Grind, was a community leader by profession, community manager and leader in Sony, right? Or in EA Games.
Yeah, at EA. Yeah, in the gaming industry.
In the gaming industry, and serial entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about 2 things today. First of all, just a bit about Derek. What's behind that community mindset that makes him create all the time communities and ventures. We're going to talk about how this amazing movement started, Startup Grind. We're going to talk what's Startup Grind exactly. And then what I love the most about Startup Grind, it's not just a space for founders and entrepreneurs to learn from each other and support each other. It became a playground for creating new startups. It became what we try to say all the time, that like it takes a village, it takes a community to build a startup. And Startup Grind is the best example for that. And we're going to talk about the impact of the community on the startups coming from the community, like Bevy, and we'll finish talking a bit about your current venture, which is Bevy Labs, which I'm fascinated about, and hopefully we'll do really cool things with Bevy in the near future. So without any further ado, Derek, how are you doing today? Good day?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It looks like a great event, and hopefully everybody's holding up, and your team probably needs some rest here pretty soon, but you're getting to the end. So congrats on putting this whole thing together. It's incredible, and grateful to be included in it.
Yeah, you did so many events. How many events do you guys do a weekly in Startup Grind?
We do about maybe 80 events a week, something like that.
Amazing. And just extrapolate that for yearly, it's about 4,000 events a year. Effing believable and awesome. And can you tell us a bit about yourself, about how you started into world of community, what drew you into that, maybe a personal experience, the guy that you acquired, David. I love his story that he talks about how he started in his childhood in the gaming community and how it came from his emotional standpoint. What made it for you? What was your mindset when you started coming into the world of community?
Yeah, I don't know that my story is as interesting as David's or others, but I just was trying to solve my own problems. I was an entrepreneur and didn't have a lot of people to rely on or to help. When you work in a big company, you have this whole support system. When you work in a small company, basically no one cares what you're working on. And so a friend and I just started getting our friends together, and we started brainstorming and trying to help each other. And, that sort of led to the next month, to the next event, to the next month, to the next event. And fast forward a couple of years, and people really resonated with what we were doing. It solved a problem in the world that existed for a surprisingly large amount of people. For me, anyways, I didn't think that it was ever really going to amount to anything. It wasn't really meant to be some global community. It was just meant to be something to help us. And but we sort of rallied people around in our shared values and sort of the mission of what we were doing, and some great people got involved and sort of helped take that banner for us, take the torch for us. And today it's all over the world. And really, this is just this idea of like, get the community, let the community take it and run with it, and let it kind of become what it becomes, and don't be so worried about controlling it, and and let things just kind of happen. And so we've been blessed to be part of seeing that grow.
So I think, that's something when I interview a lot of community leaders and founders and stuff like that what I love about it, it's almost like a startup. Just if you talk about passion and finding a need, it's more about your need and your passion. And it's almost always happens in a way that you don't care about the results. You just care about, you don't think about the big community. You don't talk about like having a game plan. I'm going to reach a size or something like that, to say, I have an issue. I have a burning issue. And you talked about people with same values and articulate your problem. And that's what I find the most hard. People say, oh, let's just write a few words. But I think that what usually great leaders do is articulate the problem, articulate the values around it. Today, I know the 3 values that Startup Grind had. Was it always the same values? Did it evolve when you grew up? Did you distill it? How was it in the beginning and how it looks today?
Yeah, in the beginning, we never talked about it. We just kind of just were ourselves, I guess. And then I had a speaker that attended very early on, and he invited me to lunch at his very fancy office, Sand Hill Road, afterwards. And he said, hey, do you know what makes Startup Grind special? And I said, I don't really know what you're talking about. And he said this to me. He said, it's the values. And, he said, Startup Grind. And we started talking about it. And it was about giving more than you take and helping others first and making friends. And I said, well, yeah, of course it is. Like, aren't all events like that? And he said, no, that's exactly what events are not like. And that's why people are gravitating towards what you're doing. And I came back to my garage where we were working as a team. I'm back in my garage with COVID. So you can see that I'm telling the truth in the Silicon Valley garage here, with my son working in the corner doing Zoom school. But I came back here and I was just sitting over there, and in 10 minutes, I wrote out the values. We put them on the website that afternoon, and we've never changed them. I don't know, values are generally a representation of the founders. I wouldn't say that I'm the best representation of those values, but I would say that I definitely aspire to be a good representation of those things. And some of the people that we work with around the world, I mean, they would see that and just like, it's like a magnet for those kinds of people. And so it really became like that, that 10 minutes of work that we did in the garage, like it became one of the most important things we did to really differentiate amongst other people and other communities.
Did you know the Burning Man story? You know the Burning Man, of course, the Valley. Did you ever go?
I've never been to Burning Man, no.
But you heard about the 10 principles of Burning Man, right?
Tell me about them.
So great. So actually, the 10 principles, I think what they made out of the 10 principles, which anybody that wants to register to join Burning Man has to go through an online test, and we inform that you read the 10 principles and you accept them upon yourself. And I think what they distilled in the 10 principles is the ultimate 10 commandments for a community. But it's not one of my lectures. I talk about it in a different lecture. But what's the more interesting thing? When you join Burning Man today, you hear about the values, you hear about the 10 principles, and you say, oh, of course, it was always here. But when the head of the Israeli branch of Burning Man of the regional Burning Man. Before I went to the one in Valley in 2017, he got us like into a meetup and said to the people going to Burning Man, do you know how it all started? And the story is that the Burning Man started in 86, but only in 2004, the principles and values were written down, almost 20 years later.
Huh.
And it's a thing, because I think what you said is so true. And when you think about also branding today and having good representation, you know, writing words is just words, fresh, giving, you know, everybody says we're a family. You know, so many companies saying like Enron had amazing values, but Enron lied to everyone and had a lot of problems. And when you have people like Derek or Shachar, that we're going to talk in a second, and you see them, how they really act and how they behave, that's the values. And the behavior are the values. But then when you need to grow, you need to do what you did in the garage and say, okay, guys, you see, we have a group of people, everybody here believed in what we did. So it means it's true. And this is our values. And it came from a community. It didn't come just from a copywriter in a company that just wrote our values in a dogmatic or in a smart way, It came from the heart. It didn't come from the head. So just wanted to connect that story. So when was the time? How long was it before when you started Startup Grind until
just to add to that, Mike, I mean, I think what you're saying is, you know, being authentic, and being authentic is, in a world of fakeness, is actually, it turns out really hard to do and to have. And I think, you know, you got to kind of find the right mix of being sort of truthful and authentic, and you know, and then not being sort of too over the top of just, you know, brutally honest with people, because that can turn people off too. And there's some mix there, and Burning Man certainly has an authenticity to it that people, you know, it really is what people say it is, I think. You know, and I have a lot of friends that go to that. And I think, you know, Startup Grind is what it says it is, for better and worse. You know, we make a lot of mistakes, but you know, ultimately, like, we are trying to bring people together. Ultimately, you know, we are trying to do the right thing for startups, sometimes to our own detriment, but it doesn't matter. It's just like, you know, and I was sitting here in 2012, and someone came into the garage and said to me, this very well-known VC, and he said, hey, I'd like to raise a $50 million fund for Startup Grind. I think I can do it easily, and then you can invest in companies. And I said, well, I understand how that's good for me, but because I'll probably make a lot more money, but, you know, that doesn't really help us fulfill our mission of educating every entrepreneur in the world. And, you know, we turned things like that down along the way, just because it just didn't align with what we were trying to do, which I think if you make 1,000 or 10,000 of those decisions, you know, it eventually starts to show that sort of, hey, actually, they really do care about the people that they're trying to help, and it is authentic.
So why did you say, by the way, the hardship of being authentic, about like when you have these offers about getting a lot of money, to not be authentic? Or you said it's hard to be authentic. Why do you think it's so hard to be authentic? Because it sounds like, by the way, most of the people I know that, like, they don't have any other, and that's, by the way, I think most of the community leaders, they're sometimes people that were misfits because they had to be themselves, or they were so good and they had to create their own environment. What do you think it's a challenge to be authentic today?
Yeah, I mean, being vulnerable is you know, putting yourself out there. It's scary, and if you're not confident in, and who of us doesn't have insecurities? We all have insecurities. So, you know, being authentic is sort of this, like, here is, you know, palms open, like, here's the good, here's the bad, like, take it for what it is. And, you know, that can be frightening. It can also be empowering, you know, and, but, you know, it just, I don't know. I mean, I've been in marketing my whole career in some way or another. And, you know, I mean, we've all seen it. When nobody trusts the ads we see, we don't even trust the news we see. So, like, how do we trust the marketing, let alone we don't even trust the news? So it's the world is like full of fake stuff. And, and so it's literally easier to be fake than it is to be real. And it's less vulnerable to be fake than it is to be real. So if you are real, you actually can stand out pretty significantly. And I think we see that with, I don't know, you can see it on Twitter with people that you probably follow on Twitter, or you can see it with, voices that you read, or, people that put themselves out there and sort of say, look, I am what I am, like love it or don't, but like, this is what I am. And a lot of times for good and sometimes for bad, those people can gain significant followings because of that authenticity.
By the way, I think that's exactly the power of communities, because just being out there and being vulnerable is very hard. But when you have a community of like-minded people, in ISCL, we call it in our methodology PLM, people like me. The first thing you want to create in a community is some set of values and laws and orders and how do we behave. And that creates the environment or the fencing in order to create the environment that then I can be vulnerable and say, okay, here it's okay to be a founder. Okay, it's okay to be a dreamer and to go after something that I know that the statistics say 95% I'm going to fail. 95% that somebody thought about it better and is going to do it better than me. And I think that's exactly what you guys do with Bevy and with Startup Grind, is facilitate an environment that enables vulnerability. And that's, I think, a great point what you were noticing. So thanks for that. I didn't think about it like that, about how hard it is to be authentic. And communities are the place to facilitate authenticity. And we have many communities, only on Facebook, almost 100 million groups, which enables so many different types of PLMs and different types of authenticities. But somehow with Startup Grind, you have managed to create a space that facilitates authenticity of all types, of all cultures, of all countries. Can you give us a bit about the stats? How many branches and spaces you have around the world right now?
Yeah, we have 600 chapters. We're in 120 countries. We have about 2,000 volunteers that are part of it, and 600 active chapters. We've had thousands of chapters, but we just don't, if they're not active, then we try not to count them. And people ebb and flow of your volunteers. You can't, one of my rules has always been you can't yell at a volunteer. And so, if somebody has a life event and they have to shut down, they shut down. It's not the end of the world. But yeah, we've done about 15,000 events, hosted almost 1 million people in person, and now virtually, many hundreds of thousands of people virtually this year. So, yeah.
So I want to talk about, there's something I saw, but I want to check it out with Startup Grind. You started, it was you. Who are the friends that co-founded with you Startup Grind?
I had a friend named Spencer who was an engineer at Apple and had left, and he was kind of trying to do an entrepreneurial thing. And then I have another friend named Joel, who he and I still work together 10 years later, who also helped build it with me.
And then you did like a meetup, or how did you start it? What was like the first?
Yeah, we just used Meetup or MailChimp and all the things that people, use to scrap things together, WordPress, Eventbrite. And then that worked. That stuff worked okay until we got to be about, 50 chapters, and then it all started to break.
How fast did you have 50 chapters?
It took us about a year and a little bit, maybe a year and a half.
Did you plan on having this thing that scales into chapters? Didn't you just want to do a meetup for yourself in the beginning?
In the beginning, no, there was no plan to do any of it. And then I had somebody attend and say, I love this. We need this in Los Angeles. And my first reaction to that was like, well, there must be 10 of these. And he said, no, there's no community like this. There's no values we don't have this. And he convinced me. And he almost in many ways is the most important person of Startup Grind ever, because he convinced me that it could be bigger than it was ever intended to be. And so I'm very grateful to that person who's long since, he didn't last very long. He only kind of showed us a little bit of the way, and then we kind of ran with it. But but yeah, so we got LA and then we got New York and then we got, started getting chapters all over, and people would come to Silicon Valley to attend, and then they would be going home. They would just like be here for a week, and we'd always say, start a startup grind when you go home, and we would get people, take it with them right from there. And then people said like, hey, Derek, you need to go fly to all the events. You need to do the interviews. And I was like, well, I have small children. I can't do that. And so I sort of just made a decision that if we couldn't find someone to do it in that city, that we weren't going to do it, because I wasn't going to fly everywhere. And so that sort of started to make it scalable. And then from there, once we got about 5 or 10 cities, we kind of put our eyes on how do we get to 20, and then
Derek Andersen meeting.
Once we got to 20, it was how do we get to 50, and we kind of knew once we got to 50 that somebody wasn't just going to come in and copy us. It was going to be very hard to replace us, and so we just like went full steam for 50, and then from there we pretty consistently just kept growing.
Amazing. And did you ever see the short TED talk about how to create a movement?
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
I'll use it in almost all my lectures, and it's all about what you said, the guy from LA. It's about the first follower that makes a lone nut into a leader. And that's exactly how, and it's amazing that you recognize it. And I think what's amazing with the great leaders of today, and that's what's in the community leaders, that they cultivate the first followers. And we're talking about Shacha, which is the director of the Israel chapter of Startup Grind and a global advocate of you guys. So when did you, and by the way, we had today also Benji Singer, the GM of WeWork in Israel. Don't know if you know, but WeWork Israel was the first WeWork outside the US. And once WeWork, after 6-7 years of working, opened Israel, they started going globally. Because then they were like, Adam was like, oh, I'll just make it here. There's so much to expand in the US. Why would you expand? It's so complex to open something so far. And suddenly when they opened in Israel, so it was okay, it started blooming all over Europe and then Asia and stuff like that. So regarding the international, so you had 50 branches, probably the 50 branches were only in the US, or we were talking already in the first year you started branching out outside the US?
No, we just sort of said we found people would apply from all over. Like the most applications we've ever gotten from any one city is in Pune, India. I think we've had like 1,000 applications. Like we've had probably not that many, but hundreds and hundreds of applications from one city. But we just said like we're going to find good people to match our values, and it doesn't matter where they are, what city they're in, how big it is. Like we're just going to do it. And so Singapore was one of our first chapters, in Toronto, and I don't know, Bangalore. I mean, we had chapters, just random ones, just kind of dotted in different places, and that made it feel bigger than it was. Because, we didn't have much of a presence in India, but we had a chapter in Bangalore. So that felt big. And so anyways, so that, it was really always about the people and not about the location. And then frankly, we ended up having, I came to our chapter in Tel Aviv, and then, in, 2015. And then, the next day I was in Ramallah at our chapter in Ramallah, and we had a chapter in Gaza, and we had a chapter in Tehran. We had chapters in Rwanda. We had chapters in all sorts of different places around the world. And again, people sort of, this idea that, people at their most fundamental level, from my perspective, are just trying to feed their kids. And so if you look at people, if you put yourself in their shoes in that way, I've lived outside the US for 8 years of my life. And I went to school with Moroccans, and I went to school with Turks, and I was in New Zealand. And I've been around all sorts of different people, and everybody's the same, they're just trying to take care of their families. And I think that's sort of been the glue of Startup Grind, where we can all sort of put aside our political differences, put aside, the issues our countries have, and come together in ways that, the politicians and frankly the United Nations and nobody can do, because, we sort of see ourselves at the more fundamental level of humanity, and not, just, the country, shirts and capes that we wear, that kind of a lot of times bring out the differences in us and pull us apart.
Amen to that, man. Amen. So, by the way, the hardest thing about the community, I still hear you, and you did so many things since you started Startup Grind, and you're still so passionate about the mission and what you guys are doing, and you devote so much of your time to talks with different communities around the world of Startup Grind, and even with communities like ours and the network of communities that we're trying to create and help teach them. But you have a startup right now, but now it's funded. How did you manage to balance? Now you also have a family and a community and speaking engagements and Bevy. Then you didn't have any money, and you started a new startup with all your hardships and 50 chapters in 1 year. Like, how do you balance your community volunteering, passion following, and where do you find the energy to it? I have my answer, but I would love to have yours. And starting a new startup, which was also quite a success, right? Your first one too.
I've had mostly failures, the things that I've started, to be honest. And those failures, even still 10 years later, as the first startup that I did, as I think about them, and I do still think about them a lot, they bring me immense amounts of pain to still think about some of the mistakes that I have made. I know Silicon Valley talks a lot about, you can just, failure's inconsequential. That's what Vinod Khosla, who's a famous venture capitalist, says. Failure doesn't matter. Like, success matters, which is true, but it doesn't change the pain that you feel from the mistakes that you have made. And so, yes, in the midst of many failures, I have had a few things that have been successful. Startup Grind being one of those, and then we built a tool for Startup Grind to run the community and to scale it, and that tool is called Bevy. That is my shirt at the moment. As Mike said, I was going to run out of money. I was about 6 weeks. Totally true story. I was 6 weeks from completely running out of money with Startup Grind, and we had this sort of golden anchor of Bevy, like just dragging the Startup Grind boat down. And so I frantically one night, I prayed really hard, and then I sent a bunch of emails, and and I sent it to all these people I had interviewed and asked them to help me, and thankfully was able to raise $1 million and split the companies in half, and then we've since Bevy is now used by companies like Google and Salesforce and Adobe. And a lot of other companies to run their communities. They had similar problems to Startup Grind. And so anyways, a little bit of context there of what Bevy is. And then, yeah, Mike, as you said, I have 4 kids. So I don't know, there is no balance. That's balancing, like there is no balance. So it's like, it doesn't need to be equal to be balanced. And, sometimes I need to spend 100% of my time with my wife and like just work on that relationship. And sometimes I need to spend 100% of my time with my kids. I coach baseball for my kids because it gives me an excuse to be able to spend time with my sons. And then other times I work all night on my startup, or last night I was 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep, and I was like thinking about today and some things I have to do, including this. And I just there I am at 4 a.m. Till 6 a.m. just laying in bed, thinking about these dumb things. So there is no balance, but you've got to try to keep your physical, your mental, your spiritual, your relationships. You need to try to keep all those things in balance so that they don't break, and it's easy to break them. And I work every day to try to do that. I haven't solved it, but I gotten to this point.
So Derek, I'm going to follow up on that because I'm in your footsteps, starting our own company and growing quickly and starting my family. I'm expecting I have a boy, I'm expecting a daughter, have a wife as an entrepreneur herself. So we have a very hectic home. So I'm going to try, you're 2 steps ahead of me. So I'm going to try to follow your footsteps and do less mistakes, or at least learn from your mistakes, because I don't want to have so much pain. Because it seems like a huge burden on you, but really, don't you still feel that the mistakes you have had a great reward on their side, which is the lessons that are carved so strongly in your head that you will never forget them, and most likely will not repeat them again?
Yes, and there's this book by an amazing person named Steve Blank, and it's called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And you should look it up if you haven't. Just go watch some of his YouTube videos, and he talks about Steve Blank.
Okay.
He runs. He's one of the entrepreneur teachers at Stanford, and he's a very successful entrepreneur. And what he talks about is he's really the person that coined the term product market fit. And then Eric Ries at Lean Startup he was one of his students, and he really took it and made it a much more broader accepted thing. But in his book, he talks about how, if you should never market a product before you get product market fit, before you have a grown up product. It makes sense, right? It's obvious. But I didn't know that. And I launched a product and it was such a huge failure. And then I read it and I was like, oh my gosh. And then it was so ingrained in me. And then I saw him. I mean, he's one of our investors now. And I said to him years later, I said, Steve, if I had just gotten your book before, I would have never made those mistakes. And he said to me something I will never forget. He said, if you had gotten my book before, you would have not even noticed what I was saying. The only reason you noticed it is because of the pain that you experienced and the risks that you took and failed. And now it's ingrained in you. So I really believe what you said, Mike, that the mistakes definitely do inform you. And yes, hopefully you will learn from mine. So, you'll get there much faster and easier.
So yeah, that's what we try. But mistakes are unavoidable, as you said. Until we don't know what it's like. Questions in Passover and Jewish holidays, we have always a story of 4 sons: the good, the bad, the innocent, and the one that didn't know how to ask questions. And I think the most important thing that I learned, actually, did you hear about Jolt, a startup called Jolt?
I don't know Jolt.
So they're amazing. They're a platform of learning, and they were all about creating communities of learning. We'll talk about it another time, but the CTO is a really good friend of mine. He's younger than me, but in many ways he's my coach. And we sit many times, and one of the times I say, how do you manage? You're so young, and you're a CTO, and you manage so many tech people. He said, listen, being a manager is all about asking the right questions. And I think that's what we're good at, as communities, and we do meetups, we interview people. And you said you interviewed so many people, and that's what you did. When you wanted a solution, you just ask a question. Can you help me? This is what I'm doing. This is Bevy. Probably that was the email, right? Hey, remember me? This is my email. This is my issue. This is what I think is the solution. I need your money to do the solution. Does this sound right? And I'm sure that you didn't get just $1 million. I'm sure you got also a lot of advice, right? Which is not less valuable.
For sure.
And that's, by the way, why we always say that you need a community to build a startup, because you need these advices, you need the product market fit. And having a community is what helps you create the product market fit. So if, by the way, you're not in the startup grind yet, go and join a chapter and go learn from other entrepreneurs who failed miserably, and try to fail less, because you'll fail anyway, but you'll fail just less.
Exactly.
A bit about Bevy. So tell us about the product market fit of Bevy, and then Mike has some. We have Michael here with some really good questions. He's also an entrepreneur. He was an intern with us. Now he's part-time working with our company, but he's an entrepreneur leading his own company. So I really want to give him the stage for a minute. But just I want a few things about Bevy. Tell us about how Bevy grew and what happened in the last few years. Because again, like every good startup story, struggling, you saw the need in your community, you saw a real product market fit, I think.
Yeah.
Started building, and tell us about that journey, and then we'll go to the Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, we built for a year with just for us to solve our own problem. I didn't get any customer feedback. I didn't ask anyone. I had looked at all the products that were in the market. Nothing solved our problem more than about 60% of the pain that we had. And it was going to be really expensive. And so we said, let's just build our own and we'll solve 100% of the pain. It'll cost more upfront, but in the long run, we'll save money. And so that's what we did, and we launched it, and it was not perfect at first, but very quickly it started to solve a lot of problems and to help us grow very fast. And then really the inflection point came when there was a company called Atlassian. Maybe some of you know Jira or Trello, and they were looking for a platform, and they were using a product that had raised like $15 million, and we hadn't raised any money. And when I got in the pitch, and somehow we won, and it was like $100,000 a year, and it was just like, and we stole it from this other company, and it was like, how is our product better than this thing that's got $15 million? This is crazy. And like that was like, for me, we had other people that had bought it, like CMX had bought it, and a few other people had, sort of small accounts. But when Atlassian bought it and they validated it, and in spite of all of our flaws, like the pain was so great that they would still work with us. That was like the moment for me where it was like, okay, like this is a real thing. I set up a company the next month. Like we started to figure out how to split it up. Like that was the catalyst to do it. And then, because we built it for big startup grind, like it worked really well for big companies. So Salesforce is one of our first 20 customers. Wow. And, MuleSoft and Docker and like these very, Gainsight, like these big brand names, Duolingo, they joined us very early just because they wanted to be very big, and they saw with startup grind that they could have a really scalable solution very easily and quickly. And it's not all uphill. I mean, like we spent years trying to get to $1 million in revenue. We spent more years trying to get to 3 million in revenue, and then things did start to roll. But it's, I've said like getting to 1 million in revenue is like the hardest thing I've ever done, and getting to 3 million is the hardest thing I've ever done. Getting to 5 million is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's like everything is hard. There are no shortcuts. And so now with COVID, we've gone from doing just in-person events to a lot of virtual events as community. So we'll do like 500 virtual events a month with Salesforce, where they
only Salesforce. That's
only Salesforce. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, every sort of a very, each customer sort of uses it in big scalable ways across the world. Well, hopefully not everyone does, but hopefully they do.
So we'll also send maybe a short thing about Bevy after the conference, because you guys are doing such an amazing work with David, also developing communities and having all the quirks and new stuff on the new platform. But we don't have a lot of time, and I know you're going from back to back and meetings, and I don't want you to stay awake at 4 a.m. because I do it a lot, and it's really hard. So I'm going to put Michael on to ask a question, and we'll see, and we'll recap after that. So Michael.
Okay, great. Hey, Michael.
Yeah, I'm going to leave you two pinned.
Hi.
Hey, Michael.
My question is, as a starting entrepreneur, is what would be a good advice?
And we lost Michael, which is probably because he's not connected to, he's speaking, but he's not. So yeah, we all have Max here, and we're on Startup Nation Central, and they have a problem with the ping. I'm connected now to a direct line to the wall, but he lost it. Here, he's back again.
No problem. The beauty of virtual.
Hi, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm just excited to be a celeb. So again, my question is how, or actually, what would be a tip that you can give young aspiring entrepreneurs such as myself from your experience, from things you might have heard, because there's a lot of the chicken and the egg kind of situation. You need this to do that, but you need that to do this. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I think one of them, I mean, there's no, and this is a tricky thing about entrepreneurship, is that there's no like perfect course. It's just like, just do this. It's not a math equation, you know, like A plus B equals C, and it's not like that. And everybody's different. I was looking at an email that yesterday from an investor when I that first round, he's a very well-known person in Silicon Valley, and I sent him a note in the middle of the night and said, "Can you help?" And he told me the next morning, "Hey, you should just bootstrap. Don't raise money." I'm like running out of money. Like I have no money. So I couldn't. And I asked him why. And he said, well, because you can't run Startup Grind and Bevy at the same time. And you're not focused. And this person emailed me yesterday and asked me to invest now. And he could have invested like when it was like nothing, you know, and now he wants to invest as it's grown. So like, it's just to say like, he was right, but he's also wrong, because there's no one way, you know? And so, and I didn't do a good job at convincing him of that. So, you know, it's my fault that he didn't invest, not his. But anyways, what I was going to say to you is one of the things that will give you a shot at everyone, I think, gets a shot, but you have to stay in the game long enough to get a shot. Like it's all about time. Like, so the first 5 years of my entrepreneur career, like I tried. I mean, I worked just as hard on those ideas as Startup Grind or Bevy, just as hard, maybe harder. And like they completely failed. And they weren't the right ideas. They didn't have customers. They didn't have people that wanted it. There was no market need for the problems that I thought I was solving. And so it needed time. Those things led to other things, and Startup Grind just kind of germinated over years, and there was no pressure on it. And so if you have this pressure to like, I have to make money in 3 months, and I like, or my wife's going to kill me, or you know, like this and this, like those are problems you have to solve. Like as an entrepreneur, like relationship management, like how, like your spouse is maybe one of the most important people in your startup, or your significant other, if you have one, or your partner, or whoever. Like if they say you need to quit, you're probably going to have to quit. So like all of these things, like if you run out of time, you'll never get a chance to find something that has the potential to take off. And so anything you can do to extend that clock as long as possible, which is, I mean, it's like, yeah, that's obvious, Derek, but most people, if you go like talk to people, it's like, well, why do startups fail? Most people say like, oh, they ran out of money, but actually it's about time. And so you've got to, like, your job is to keep the clock running, and no matter what. And so try to find ways to do that, so you have a long enough chance to get a shot, for something to come at you, and for you to then, you got to take it when you see it. But like, if you're out, you're out. You'll never see it. So,
but Derek, I want to add, like, I'm sure there's something different, and I saw from what I heard about the other startups between Bevy and the other startups that you closed. Is there something you can point about the difference between the other startups, even though you worked harder on them, that Bevy has that the other ones didn't?
They solved a real problem. I mean, it's pretty simple. Like the other things, I invented problems. I invented, they weren't authentic problems.
Can I dare to guess and say that it solved the most urgent problem that Derek had?
For sure.
Biggest problem, and that's I think why. When you try to solve your own biggest problem and don't look for a problem to solve, but the thing that really drives you nuts. My spouse's story, we're not married, but my spouse's story is exactly like that. We were in my backyard. She saw a plastic bag, and she worked in the plastic industry as a chemical engineer. And she was trying to scream about like plastic bags and how horrible. I said, baby, you're a chemical engineer. By the way, she hated being employed. She was an entrepreneur by heart. I always knew it. And said, just leave it and start solving it. And that's what happened. And for 2 years, she worked without a salary, with nothing. And that's exactly what I think Michael will be with us. But it's exactly what you were trying to say. Time is not about money. It's about how much energy and dedication you have to do that. And you get time by being passionate. And like you said, you don't know where you have the power from. You don't know where you have the energy. I think I have the answer. It's from your passion and determination to solve that problem. And that gives you time. And when you have enough determination, you can say to my wife, listen, it's so important to me. You know, you love me. Give me time to work on what I'm passionate about. And I went through the same thing with my startup. Like once we had the baby, everybody changed. Like my wife's like, no, now we have a baby, you have to come to sleep earlier, you have to be here more. No, I'm still passionate about it. I need to have my time to do the stuff I did. Nothing changed in my hand, but things changed. Derek, listen, it was so inspiring. Sorry, I went on a rant, but
no, thank you. That's great. I mean, that's exactly it. That's and even like, you know, balancing those things of like, hey, now it's you need to do this and I need to do this, and like trying, again, that question of balance. What is balance? Is not equal. It could be totally out of balance one day and the next day totally in balance, like overly balanced, like, you know. So it's, you know, it sounds like y'all are figuring that out, and I gotta find out about the plastic bags. I think that's what a great problem to solve.
I think, you know, what I always explain, that more important than physical currency, it's part of my method of communities, is social currency. And communities are, you talked about balance, is never balance. It's not like you buy a product, I pay for Bevy and I get the product. With community, you give, it's not balance. I give without getting back. And one day in the chain of effects, 2 years later, when I send an email, you'll invest back in me. It's not because you'll invest in 2 years. And that's, I think, the imbalance is, in a very general way, is when you have enough time, balance will be restored. And that's what's community all about. Giving, giving, giving. Another speaker today said, a guy from India, Paras Pandir, the guy that won the CMX community guy, he said, jab, jab, hook. Give, 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 take. And that's about it. You give, and one day you come back.
I like that.
So Derek, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone, and good luck the rest of the week. And appreciate you including me.
Thank you, and good work with Bevy. See you around, mate.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.